You know, no Palestinian event would be complete without some Mahmoud Darwish poetry, in my opinion. And so if you indulge me, I'd like to begin with one of my favorite Mahmoud Darwish poems. I'll recite it in Arabic first and then English. This one is called Ala Hadhihi al-Ard, on this land. Ala Hadhihi al-Ard ma yastahiqqu al-hayat. على هذه الأرض ما يستحق الحياة تردد إبريل رائحة الخبز في الفجر تعويذة امرأة للرجال كتابات أسخيلوس أول الحب عشب على حجر أمهات يقفن على خيط ناي وخوف الغزاة من الذكريات على هذه الأرض ما يستحق الحياة نهايات أيلول سيدة تترك 40 بكامل مشمشها ساعة الشمس في السجن غيم يقلد سربا من الكائنات هتافات شعب لمن يصعدون إلى حذفهم باسمين وخوف الطغاة من الأغنيات على هذه الأرض ما يستحق الحياة على هذه الأرض سيدة الأرض أم البدايات أم النهايات كانت تسمى فلسطين صارت تسمى سيدتي أستحق لأنك سيدتي أستحق الحياة. Rest in peace, Mahmoud Darwish. He said, we have on this land that which makes life worth living. We have on this land all of that which makes life worth living. April's hesitation, the aroma of bread at dawn, a woman's beseeching of men, the writings of Aeschylus, love's beginning, moss on a stone, mothers standing on a flute's thread, and the invader's fear of memories. We have on this land that which makes life worth living. September's end. A woman leaving 40 behind with all of her apricots. The hour of sunlight in prison. A cloud reflecting a swarm of creatures. A people's applause for those who face their own erasure with a smile. And the tyrant's fear of songs. We have on this land all of that which makes life worth living. On this land, the lady of our land, mother of all beginnings, mother of all ends. She was called Palestine. Her name later became my lady. Because you are my lady, I have all of that which makes life worth living. Rest in peace, Mahmoud Darwish.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight. Indeed, Palestine is where all of the speakers who will be speaking to you tonight originate from, either live there now or their families hail from there. But we each got different experiences to tell with regards to the Nakba itself, but also in relation to the ongoing Nakba. So my name is Kamel Hawash. I hail from Jerusalem. Both of my parents were born in Jerusalem before Israel was created. And just to illustrate how the Nakba affected us beyond 1948, when my father died here in the UK in 1999, I could not take him to be buried in his hometown. Just think about that you don't have the choice of even having your father buried there. But for those Brits who remember Robert Maxwell, the notorious Robert Maxwell, he was buried in Jerusalem. Now there is the injustice that continues beyond that. I also thought about the Nakba even more when in 2017, I visited Palestine, landed at Lud Airport, just so everyone remembers, it's not Tel Aviv Airport, it's Lud Airport. And after some interrogation by the Israeli authorities, I was denied entry. So I sat there in Tel Aviv Airport, in Lud Airport, looking out of the window at Palestine, and I couldn't walk out to it. This is, and since then I haven't been back, but it just illustrates to you. No Brit leaves Britain thinking they can't return to Britain. No French person leaves France thinking they won't be allowed back. But we Palestinians continue to struggle. Even when we have international passports, we are treated differently. We are discriminated against when we get to the entry points. After I was denied entry in 2017, 3 days later, the head of the Palestinian community in Chile, where there are about 500,000 Palestinians, he was denied entry at the bridge. So these are the more recent memories of the Nakba. I genuinely, although I thought I knew what being a refugee is, it was really only when I couldn't get onto my land from the airport, a walk of no more than maybe 50 yards in imperial units, that I realized how difficult it is for people, Palestinians in Lebanon, in Syria, in Jordan, to just walk back. And it reminded me also, and we will hear from Gaza in a minute, of Palestinians going in 2018 to the fence because they could walk home. People who hail from Najd, which was a Palestinian village, could have walked to Najd. And you know what? Najd is Sidrot. So that particular settlement was built on the ruins of Najd. I'll finish with a bit more about my personal story. I wasn't there in 1948, but I also met a few years ago a professor called Professor Raja'i Boussaile, who hailed from Lud, in fact. He was a literature professor in the United States. He was a blind man, and he was displaced in 1948 as a blind person, separated from his family, and it took some time for him to be reunited with them. There are lots and lots of these stories that Palestinians tell their children, their grandchildren, when it comes to the Nakba. And what we thought we would do this week, and tonight in particular, is just to give the opportunity to Palestinians to recount their memories or their thoughts about the Nakba and how it sort of lives and resides with the communities they are in now. So I'm very pleased that we will have some really fantastic speakers to talk to us. We're going to start in the diaspora and make our way into Palestine, all parts of it. So what I'd like to do now is to introduce Selma Dabbagh, who is an author. Selma is the head of strategy at the International Center for Justice for Palestinians. And I'm sure she will tell us where she hails from and give us her reflections. Over to you, Selma.
Thank you, Kamal, and thank you to PSC for inviting me to be here. I always feel a little bit like, because I'm half English and I live in diaspora, that sometimes speaking about the Nakba from a position of privilege can make you feel a little bit of an imposter in some ways, but it's not that one is not affected, but one is affected differently. Sometimes perhaps the scars are more psychological than physical, and that maybe there are other issues with regards to a certain sense of survival guilt and and displacement, a constant displacement that is inherent in being a diaspora Palestinian that I've definitely experienced. I've lived in a total of 8 countries. For most of my childhood, like my teenage years, I lived in Kuwait. And my father, who comes from Jaffa, was expelled in 1948. He's now 85, and he was 10 years old at the time. And although these stories are familiar, I think that his story is still a very potent one, because it really encapsulates the nature of ethnic cleansing that Ilan Pappé talks about in his book, The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine, because it's typical of showing how his father, who was a political leader, was imprisoned several times by the British, and there were assassination attempts on his father. So it was this idea of get rid of the leadership and then you terrorize the children. And my father at the age of 10 was hit by a grenade and put in a hospital. When he was in hospital, you know, Jaffa was in a state of, you know, bombardment, and there was a high level of fear. And at that stage, what happened to the family, and my father always says that the sea was always flat as a plate, but that day it was very high, it was very rough. And what at that stage, my family, who as Sami Abu Shahada was just saying, we were a big family in Jaffa, the Dabbaghs. None of us are left now. So at that point, it was like these choices were made by different members of the family. Somebody very quick. Do we go down to Gaza? Do we go to the sea? If we go to the sea, do we go north to Lebanon, or do we go south to, you know, south to Egypt, or do we go inland to Syria? My father, because he was on a stretcher, they tried to get him onto the boat, but they couldn't manage it. So they ended up going inland, and they went to Jordan, and then they went to Nablus and Syria with many members of the family. And it's something that it doesn't go away. I mean, one thing that you look at when you're writing fiction, or if you ever look at fiction, is this idea of time. It's not a continuum. One lives in the past as much as one is living in the present day in terms of one's thoughts. And the events of that time are very live. And every time that there's a new event, a new issue, it all gets rewired, re-triggered. So from our family, my father's family, they then went to Syria, from Syria to Kuwait, where a lot of them stayed. My father then came to England, met my mother. This going back to Kuwait, I think it's also important because of this expulsion again in 1990, where a lot of my father's family, even those who had been born in that country, didn't know any other country, were forced to flee with 380,000 other Palestinians. If you then take that and the statelessness of some of them was really apparent then. I think for me, that was my really politicizing moment, that point in time of seeing how people were just suddenly, you know, from one day to the next, their lives upturned. And I went to Jerusalem in 1992, and I lived in Sheikh Jarrah, where Muna is from. And I really decided that was it. I was going to live there forever. You know, when people said, how long are you going to stay here? I said, forever, you know, like very, very sure that I would. But when I left to renew my visa, I was denied twice to return. And then, so that was in another way of showing how the Nakba is sort of continuing. I could not fulfill my desire as a 22-year-old to live in this place. And then now, even more recently, because we then went on from when I came back to England and I studied to become a lawyer, and then went to Bahrain, where I had children. Just by chance, I happened to be in Bahrain to have my children. But in the recent regulations, which came out in December of last year, one of the countries which is banned for anybody to enter the West Bank under the new COGAT regulations is Bahrain. We don't know why, but that means that for my children, you know, for no reason, they can't even visit. So we now have this very strong issue of the right of entry, which is causing another, you know, shedding off and dislocating, and a refusal to allow the creation of identity links and giving back to one's country. The other thing I'd just like to say on the point of Palestinian literature, because I work as not just as a lawyer, but also as a fiction writer, is when I wrote my first novel, Out of It, I was really interested to see, feeling that as I was at the end of the diaspora, like one of the most sort of the furthest from the points where the harshness of Israeli treatments of the Palestinians was felt, somewhere like Gaza, where I felt I was really in this privileged position. I was very interested to see what I thought connected all Palestinians, no matter where in the world they might be. And for me, I felt that it's really this issue of political consciousness, of what do you do with this unresolved injustice, this continuing trauma? How do you personally relate to it? How do you try to give to it? And it's given rise to this new generation of people with a social consciousness. And I think that we can now, something very exciting is happening in Palestinian literature, where you've got this heterogeneity of voices from the diaspora and inside, people writing in English, in Arabic, in Hebrew, in French. And you have all these ways of responding to this collective experience of being alive and having your nature of being of a state, of having a place of safety, constantly being taken away from you. So that's how I'd like to conclude. And thank you again to the PSC for inviting me to be here.
Thank you so much, Selma. It's so important to hear that connection. And we moved around. I was personally born in Saudi Arabia. If you lived in Bahrain, and I remember the first time we tried to visit after 1967 war, and seeing that the flag that wasn't the Palestinian flag and so on. It all is part of our memory. Next, we will go to Gaza. We all know that there's been an abhorrent attack on Gaza today, and we are really grateful to Rana Shubair, who is an author and an activist from Gaza, who will have a bit more time than the others just to tell us a little bit about Gaza today, and then the recollections that she has from there. So Rana, over to you. I hope you're able to unmute.
Yes, hello. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can, very clearly.
First of all, thank you for inviting me to speak today. It just came at a very crucial time. I'm sure everybody heard of the unexpected attack last night. We were asleep. It was barely like 2 a.m. and we just woke up to these huge explosions. And my kids came running into my room saying, "Mom, they've attacked an apartment." And you know, when you're asleep and you wake up suddenly and you're trying to just understand what's going on, or you know, I just thought it just instantly took me back to what happened in August. But this time it happened in the middle of the night where everybody was asleep. And turned out that, you know, they attacked an apartment building and killed one man whom they say that he is wanted on their list from the Islamic Jihad, and 2 of his children. And then, you know, when you bomb a building, if you just bomb one apartment, does every other apartment in the building and the whole neighborhood gets affected. So their neighbors who are just ordinary citizens, whom I know personally, he's my personal dentist. He was killed with his son and his wife, and they left 3 children behind. And this happened at the same time. They had these simultaneous attacks in Gaza and in Rafah, killing another commander with his wife and his child. And, you know, you're just, I mean, until this moment, I'm just trying to process what happened, because it was totally unpredictable. And I mean, there was nothing going on. There weren't even drones in the sky last night. And we thought it was just we were actually visiting family, and it was a quiet night. But then this is how it is with the Israeli occupation. They attack at their will, anytime, any place, and they always get away with it. You know, this is because they've never been held accountable for these things. So after that, I mean, nothing has happened since the attack, where everybody's just waiting to see what's going to happen. So we're just sitting at home waiting. So this is I guess the update of the events here. it's very sad because I know these people personally. Some of them have, the children that were killed, they were preparing to go to a school trip, a trip with their school, and their mothers were saying, their friends were saying that they were preparing, the goodies for the trip and all of that. And it really, it was really heart-wrenching for me to think how our children, they have just these innocent dreams, they want to go out with their friends and eat goodies and all of that. And then they have their dreams killed and obliterated and their whole families torn apart. So now we have, we don't have, like, some of the family members survived, some of them got killed, and they have to the children have to deal with this loss of family members. And this is a continuous trauma for the people of Gaza, which they have to deal with. And it's not really easy because we're not trained as parents to deal with these situations. These are very strange situations, which I don't think they exist in any other place in the world. And there is no, I don't know if you can ever, learn how to deal with these situations. So I guess this is what happened last night. If you want me to go ahead and talk about the Nakba, I just want to say that I'm not a refugee. I'm originally from Gaza, but I always say that I like to say that I belong to all of Palestine. And I don't believe that the Nakba started and finished 75 years ago. It started, but it's been going on since, because what the Israeli occupation is doing is just a continuous, part of the Nakba, the incremental genocide, the daily killings at point blank range, the medical negligence of prisoners, which aim at intentionally leaving them to die, like what happened with Khadr Adlan last week, the house evictions, the house demolitions, the land theft. This happens on a daily basis. So it has never changed. They have just, they keep inventing new ways of displacing people, of uprooting them from their land, of fragmenting the Palestinian society as a whole. If you look at Palestine now, here in Gaza, we're like locked up in a big concentration camp. If you look at the West Bank, it's not much better. They have the apartheid wall. They have the military checkpoints. The cities inside the West Bank themselves are fragmented and isolated from one another. They also, something else that they do is that they keep enacting new laws that serve their agendas. So a child who throws a stone can be sentenced to 20 years in prison. We all know Ahmed al-Manasra has been sentenced to 9 years, and he was only 12 when he was imprisoned, and he's been suffering in isolation. And he's just a child, and he was exposed to interrogation by Israeli intelligence. And this happens, when you think of it, this happens to a child. A child can just be picked off the street and thrown in prison and be sentenced to years. So the Nakba I think the Nakba has affected every Palestinian in Palestine, not only the refugees. And when the March of Return took place here in Gaza in 2018, everybody here took part in it, whether refugees or citizens, because you no longer see this disparity between refugee and citizen anymore in Gaza. Everybody's the same. We live under the same circumstances. We are exposed to the same wars, the same attacks. Everybody is just living under the same thing. And this wasn't like 20 years ago when if you were a refugee, everybody knew you were a refugee. But right now it's like everybody's the same. So when we took them to the March of Return, which lasted a little less than 2 years, everybody, whole families participated in the return march to call for the return to their land, to call for the implementation of UN Resolution 194. And we went to the fence, we protested, and everybody knows what happened. Over 250 something people were killed, and many of them were children, women, journalists, medics. And also over maybe 60 were had to get limb amputations because the snipers were intentionally targeting, their knees and their arms and using new weapons. And because, Gaza is a testing field for these weapon manufacturers. So that the bullets that they used back then at the March of Return were butterfly bullets that pulverized the tissues, the bones, and everything else. So the leg had to be amputated. I like to, when I think of the Nakba, like I said, I think it has affected every Palestinian in Palestine. Until this day, it's a collective Nakba for everyone. Although I acknowledge the suffering in particular of the refugees in the diaspora and everywhere around the world. But when you look at also for the people of Gaza, when you look at the wars that have been waged on us, they have displaced people inside Gaza. So many people lost their homes. They had to fly they fled their homes for protection during the wars, trying to look for safety, and their homes were bombed. And I personally know some people whose homes have been bombed and rebuilt numerous times during, different Israeli aggressions. So when we address the Nakba today, I think we have to address it in a different manner because, like I said, it's a Nakba for all of the Palestinian people.
Thank you so much. That was really informative about what's happening, but also about the Nakba and what it means. Okay, we're going to have a slight change. I hope that Sami is able to go next. So please, Sami, if you can unmute yourself, the floor is yours. Sami Abu Shhadeh is the head of the Balad Tajamma political party. And we're really pleased that he's able to join us. He's, of course, from the 1948 areas, but also happens to be from Jaffa as well as Selma that we started with. Sami, over to you.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm happy and honored to be with you in one of these events of commemorating the 75th year of the Nakba, which is ongoing till today. We are 75 years later in this important historical event, and it's continuing. And I would like to thank PSC also for hosting me again. And I would like to share with you some thoughts about my personal experience as someone who was born nearly 30 years after the Nakba. And I think like what the former speakers were talking about, that there isn't one Palestinian individual that the Nakba did not affect his life. This important event in the history of our people affected all of us personally. And I would like to share with you a few things about how did the Nakba that happened in 1948 affected my own personal experience. First of all, like the vast majority of the people who were living in Jaffa before the year 1948, as a result of the war, I lost the vast majority of my family. The vast majority of my family and my relatives were expelled during the war as part of the ethnic cleansing that was mentioned. And 75 years later, I don't know them. All of them are refugees all over the world. I don't know them. I don't know where are they. All the Palestinian families are shattered, are crushed, are destroyed as a result of the Nakba. And a lot of us know very little about each other. Till today, because they were prevented also to return, to come back, we know very little about them, and we don't know our families. Another very important thing is I think the Nakba was the biggest armed robbery in the 20th century. The Zionists did not just expel the Palestinians from their homeland, they also inherited us. including those who were able to survive, to stay. In the case of Jaffa, out of 120,000 people, nearly 3,900 were left. Then, because they considered us as enemies, they concentrated us only in one neighborhood and surrounded us with a tile fence. European Jews taught us a new word that we did not know before the Nakba. It is the ghetto. We were concentrated in a ghetto in our homeland. And then all of our property was confiscated. So we lost our land and we lost our property and we became poor. Until today, one of the results of the Nakba was that our ability to develop as individuals and as family, as Abu Shhadi family, to develop economically was reduced dramatically as a result of the war and the confiscation of our land and of our property. Till today, the chances of my grandfather that was born in 1926 to develop economically before the Nakba were much higher than mine a century later. Another very important thing is that we became a minority in our homeland. In our case, we did not immigrate to Israel. Israel immigrated to us. And then the settler colonial project saw us as not part of the right race to be here, not part of the Jewish race. And they decided to expel us. So those who stayed, we stayed as a minority in our homeland. Till today, 75 years after the 1948 war, after the Nakba, the state of Israel deals with us, the Palestinian citizens of the state of Israel, as strangers in our homeland. First of all, Israel do not acknowledge our national identity. So now when I am telling you that I'm a Palestinian from the state point of view, I am lying to you, because Israel do not acknowledge at all our national identity. And they deal with us either as enemies. The state deals with us, the citizens, either as enemies, or sometimes they call us demographic threat, or sometimes they call my children demographic bomb. Or if they are quite enlightened and liberal, and they deal with us as unwelcome guests in our homeland. This thing affects our life in everything that you can imagine. When the state is dealing with the citizens, either as enemies or either as unwelcome guests in their own homeland. Of course, when I'm telling you that this is my own homeland, also from the state point of view, I am lying to you, because we don't have a homeland and we don't deserve one. You know, the Nakba is an ongoing event, and racist and racial separation and discrimination policies are affecting our lives as citizens in every basic thing that you can think of in the daily life. There isn't one thing which is not affected as a result of the Nakba and the racist policies that came after the Nakba regarding the Palestinians who are living in Israel. I'll give you a few small examples. My address, for example, I'm living in Jaffa. The street I am living in is called Rabbi Nachman Mibraslev Street, with a vast majority Arab population. But all the streets in the area are called after different names of rabbis that nobody knows about. You can see the racist policies affecting us in everything, in infrastructure, in transportation, in basics, you know. There is a railway in Israel, there is a train, and there are tens of train stations. There isn't one train station in an Arab village or city. Imagine that the whole state, there are train stations, but not even one in an Arab area. Israel has built maybe 30 hospitals since it was established. Not even one in an Arab area. So these racist policies affect us in everything, in culture, in sports, you know. My grandfather in Jaffa had, if he wanted to go to the cinema, he had a few options. There were a few cinema houses in Jaffa before 1948. Nowadays, not just in Jaffa, in all the Palestinian minority, 1.7 million people, 21% of the Israeli population, we don't have one cinema house in all of our cities and villages. My grandfather had a few in Jaffa before the Nakba. Another very important thing, we were now talking about the disaster that happened in Gaza in the last day. But unfortunately, this is not a rare occasion. We are living since the Nakba in a war zone all the time. Let me mention a few different wars that happened since then. And I want to do it quite fast, and I'm not going to mention all the massacres and all the wars. But there was the big war in the Nakba 1948. A few years later, in 1956, there was another war. Then another big war in 1967. Then another big war in 1973. Then the first invasion to Lebanon in 1982. Then the first Intifada in 1987. Then the Gulf War in 1990. Then the second Intifada in the year 2000. Then the second invasion to Lebanon in 2006. And since then, 5 or 6 different attacks on Gaza that brought thousands of casualties. And it's continuing all the time. We are living in a situation where we are living in a war all the time. And this brings destruction in everything that you can think of all the time. The horrible stories we were listening about from Gaza a few minutes ago is unfortunately part of our daily life.
If I can hurry you a little bit, please, Sami, 1 minute or so.
I'm finishing. To conclude, let me say like this. Sorry for taking this time. In the Arabic language, the word Nakba means catastrophe. And we usually use this word when there are natural catastrophes. But you know, after natural catastrophes, like now what happened in Turkey and Syria, people have the ability, the right, the chance to go and to rebuild a human society and culture again after earthquakes or hurricanes or tsunamis. But after our Nakba, we the Palestinian people, we didn't have this chance. 75 years later, we are still struggling for the basic right to have this chance to go and rebuild our state and our nation again. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sami. Really enlightening comments. We're going to go straight to Muna Dajani, who's a water environmental justice scholar. Lucky to have one foot in Palestine and another one in the UK at the moment. Muna, if you can hear me, please could you unmute yourself and start?
Thank you. Thank you, Kamel. Thank you, Ben, and Palestine Solidarity Campaign for the invitation and also for all the great work that you do. I thank you for also changing the order of the talk. And I'm happy to be here today, while also, of course, feeling very heavy heart to see, you know, the what happened in Gaza. And how, you know, how the Nakba, as Rana said, is continuous. It's a structure. It's not an event. And as Sami has said right now, you know, we commemorate the Nakba, but we are living the Nakba on a daily basis, on multiple levels, as a community, as a collective, also personal level. When the Israeli occupation interferes in the everyday intrinsic details of our lives, we find ourselves living and reliving events that has happened to our ancestors, to our grandparents, to our family members that we don't know anymore. We don't have a trace of them, and family that we have witnessed the Nakba trauma in their life. For me personally, coming from Jerusalem, I'm a Jerusalemite. Both my families, both my mom and dad are from Jerusalem. Our personal experience with the Nakba starts with my grandparents who were living in Hatamun, Al-Ba'a also, these neighborhoods that were in what is termed today as West Jerusalem, who also were forced to flee and have left behind thriving community, thriving businesses, and beautiful architecture, beautiful houses, beautiful neighborhoods. And along with, fellow Palestinians became refugees in Syria first. They managed to escape to Syria, then to settle in Jordan, but also, in a way, I say luckily, went back to Jerusalem before 1967, only to be offered a safe haven to find roots again in Sheikh Jarrah. Sheikh Jarrah, the neighborhood that has ignited the unity, intifada, all of the great solidarity that happened in 2021, I call home, or I know that is home for my grandparents, who in the 50s were offered a plot of land and a house to settle down in by the UNRWA, by the United Nations Relief Works Committee, organization, and also the Jordanian government. So Sheikh Jarrah became a haven. This is our part of this Nakba story. But I know that my grandparents also grew a few years after 1967, knew that, okay, this is, again, the Nakba is a structure, not an event. Our displacement is imminent. It's going to happen again. I remember, stories and telling of stories of how my grandparents, my dad, my father, and his siblings also lived with a feeling of worry, of anguish, of trauma, of pain, because the structural violence continued. And now settler organizations were coming after those families that have settled in Sheikh Jarrah to claim rights of ownership, to claim that they are illegal tenants, between brackets, and also, again, uproot what the community there has formed as their new home in Palestine. What's really interesting about Sheikh Jarrah, and it's so beautiful, is this like cul-de-sac, that not anymore, but it was a very, very quiet part of Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood where the compound is, and every house had an abundance of trees, beautiful trees. I would say that was the most beautiful thing. The houses themselves are very simple and basic and humble, but the trees around in Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood are beautiful. Each family came with this heavy load of being refugees, leaving behind, their homes and their communities, their trees, their plants that they knew, and they replicated that in Sheikh Jarrah. So you find all sorts of trees: almonds, figs, olive trees, date. Palm trees, jasmine. You can imagine, if you have a chance to go to Sheikh Jarrah, you will see what I mean. And this is how I remember it as a child in my grandparents' house. But I knew that slowly things were changing, and the threat, the danger of settler colonialism continues to threaten our existence in the city. And Sheikh Jarrah became the site of expulsion, of uprooting again. And we found ourselves in this generation thinking, I think a lot about my grandparents and how they must have felt a sense of relief, but still a sense of fear that this will all go away. This is a dream, that we came back to Palestine and this is going to be taken away from us. Being a Jerusalemite, a Palestinian Jerusalemite, I'll tell you that Israel has made Jerusalem uninhabitable for Palestinian Jerusalemite in every way possible. From the person you fall in love with, like they decide if the person you fall in love with is worthy to come and live with you in Jerusalem. And if you yourself are worthy of being a resident of the city. Infrastructure also pushes you out. There's not enough housing. All of these are issues that Palestinians face on a daily basis all throughout historical Palestine and the diaspora. But in Jerusalem, the feeling that this place becomes unwelcoming to their own is something that I think is a feeling that brings pain to my heart when I think about it, when I think that my grandchildren might not have the chance to be Jerusalemites, to be present in Jerusalem. That kind of breaks my heart. And really, for me, it speaks about this ongoing, this structural violence that Israel is carrying out against us. And I think another point is that it also kind of makes us think about what future do we have in our cities, in our town. As Sami has rightfully said, we have the right to love our city. We have the right to be in our city, in the public places, and to be connected to those cities again. And I do hope that the future is more just, that the future belongs to us. And I will keep that hope alive. And I hope that the Nakba indeed becomes an event that we commemorate, but our existence in Palestine will remain as a testament of our sumud and our steadfastness on the land. And thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Mona. Thank you very much indeed. And again, continuing my own personal story, as I was telling Mona, reminding her earlier. So when I was about 7 or 8, I used to, and my grandmother lived in Wadi Joz in Jerusalem. And I would walk down, I befriended a cousin who lived in Sheikh Jarrah, and he would come and take me from Wadi Joz, and we would walk to Sheikh Jarrah, and there were no buildings in between. That's something you won't see now. When you go now, it's all built up, and we would see to our right some caves, and there are stories about these caves that would be told. So I sat in that same house in 2016, before I was eventually banned from going in 2017, with my cousin. And the next time I saw that house, unfortunately, my cousin died a year later because of cancer. But the next time I saw the house was when everything kicked off, if you like, in Sheikh Jarrah, and the evictions were almost there. So again, there are memories that I couldn't go again to Jerusalem. I couldn't go and visit. I have an uncle in Jerusalem who is in his late 70s. And unfortunately, I don't think I will see him again before he passes away. And for a lot of us, that is what happens if you're not allowed to return. As I explained earlier, there are a number of events this week, but I'm going to hand over to Ben Jamal, our director, to just tell us particularly about the march on Saturday.
Kamal, just before we do that, I think we have Ahmed Masood with us.
Okay.
So he has been able to join us. His connection is a bit unstable, but it seems to be working. So we could now go to him. Okay. So we'll another person who he's just been in Gaza and he's just left. So Ahmed Masood is a good friend of PSC. He's an author and a playwright. If you can unmute Ahmed, if you are. I can't see you, so I'm relying on you to be able to unmute and speak.
I am here. Can you hear me?
We can hear you now. Yes, welcome. Please.
Thank you.
You've got about 5 to 6 minutes, if you don't mind.
All right. Okay. I'll try to be brief. There's a lot to say. Well, a lot about my journey today and about the Nakba itself. I think I was just kind of reflecting throughout the journey, through the long journey from Gaza to here. I'm in Cairo today, so apologies about the bad connection. We have a better connection in Gaza, I have to say, so I blame the Egyptian Wi-Fi in here. But I've been thinking about this in terms of what does the Nakba actually mean to me right now as a Palestinian? And actually, the answer is today is the journey that I've just made, that this long and awful journey. The answer was actually in all the people I met today at the border, all the old people who were waiting there for ages, being treated really, really badly, shouted at and pushed aside, and their passports thrown to their faces. The answer was on the faces of many young Palestinians who were trying to leave Gaza. They were so desperate to get to Turkey. Some of them to work in Turkey, but others to immigrate to Europe, maybe taking a boat or something across and become refugees yet again, I suppose. I suppose the answer was in that desperation that on people's faces and the treatment and the humiliation that we face as Palestinians on a daily basis. The other answer was also last night when I was woken up by the massive bombing Actually, I didn't wake up with the bombing. I slept through it. But what woke me up was the screaming of my nephew, my 4-year-old nephew, who was absolutely frightened by the bombing and the killing that happened at dawn in Gaza, where about 14 people were killed out of nowhere. This one came actually as a surprise to everybody in Gaza. And as I took the car to the Rafah border today, you could feel the atmosphere. Quite a really sad, somber atmosphere. People felt not just only sort of wounded by it, but also kind of humiliated in a sense. The mosques were playing Quran across all of the Gaza Strip. The news was playing, but everybody was just saying, enough. Why is this happening again? And that's what Nakba is really. It's not an anniversary. It's not a date. It's not something for me that happened before. It's something that continues to happen. And I'm sure this may have been said already. And apologies, I've missed quite a bit of the talk in here. But really, as a Palestinian, I think for me, the Nakba is a continuation of it's still going, it's still happening. My father passed away a couple of months ago, and I couldn't get to the funeral in time because it takes about 3 days to get to Gaza. That is Nakba. It's an ongoing struggle for me and my mum. When I left and here, my mum has been crying for like since I left today, because she knows how difficult it is. She knows that it's not going to be easy for her to see me again very soon. She knows that she can't leave herself and just take a break and come on holiday to the UK, etc. So I feel, that today out of every day, I suppose, today just feels that the Nakba is just not just an anniversary, it's just our daily life, really. And I hope that this will change, and I hope that at some point people will get to realize this, that we are not just kind of something that happened in the past and let's forget about the past and move on. And now it's just like an escalation that happens and between whatever that the Israelis call it or the media calls it. No, it's beyond that, really. It's the electricity, it's the lack of electricity in Gaza, it's the lack of water. There's barely any drinking water in Gaza. I suffered a lot for somebody who loves to drink water, who lives in the UK, and we're told by all GPs and doctors whenever you have any illness to drink water. In Gaza, it doesn't work. So all of these things are a real Nakba for me. I don't think that it's just an anniversary in there. I'm going to stop here, to be honest with you, because it's actually quite painful to carry on right now. The wound is quite fresh, but I wanted to say this as somebody who's just done an awful journey, to be honest with you. And by the way, the way out of Gaza is the easy part. It's what is considered to be the easy part. The way into Gaza took me about two days to get there, sleeping on the ferry on the Suez Canal. We just basically slept in the car in order to get to Gaza. But I'll end on one very, very, very funny thing that happened to me just now. As I crossed back on the Suez Canal, they checked our passports. The Egyptian army checked our passports, and he saw my British passport, and he said to me, "Why can't you fly from Gaza to London directly?" And I just laughed. I really laughed. I just thought, and he was so serious. I was like, really? And he goes, "Yeah, why are you coming here? Why here?" And I said, "Oh, we just don't have an airport. We haven't built one yet." And he was like, "Oh, okay." And he handed my passport back. And I just thought, even this, Egyptian officer who's checking Palestinians every day doesn't even know the reality and the situation, that we can't have our freedom. We can't move freely. We can't be like anybody else with an airport in our homeland. Thank you very much for listening to me.
Thank you, Ahmed. It's been really wonderful having you speak. We did, of course, have an airport in Gaza. It was called the Yasser Arafat Airport, wasn't it? That was demolished by the Israelis, and it was funded by Germany. Germany that funded the airport now bans Nakba commemorations in Germany. Just think about that. That absolutely awful government has been horrendous. I will do my thanks at the end, but I'm going to pass over to Ben Jamal now, just to remind us about the upcoming march on Saturday.
Thank you, Kamal, and thank you to all of our speakers tonight. This is the second event in a week of action for Palestine that we have initiated at PSC to mark 75 years of Nakba with an action that you can take every day, and you should be able to find the details of all of those in the chat. Now, as we've been reminded constantly tonight, there is no Palestinian who does not have a story of what happened to their family in 1948. Mine is the story of my grandparents, Shukri and Nazli Jamal, forced to flee from their home in West Jerusalem in April 48, some short time after the massacre at Deir Yassin, which happened a few miles from where they live. They died in exile in Lebanon, never able to return to their home, which still stands to today occupied by a Jewish family. But we mark the Nakba, as everybody has said, as Ahmed has just said to us, not as an historic moment of collective trauma, but as an unbroken catastrophe, an ongoing process of settler colonialism that continues to displace Palestinians across historic Palestine and prevent the return of those exiled. This week, as we have heard, we have seen the latest threads woven into the tapestry of this Nakba. At the weekend, a primary school demolished in the West Bank, and last night, the latest brutal assault on Gaza, killing 13 Palestinians, including 4 children. Now, on Saturday, the conclusion of our week of action, we will be marching in London, and we need all of you on this call tonight here in Britain to join us. We march because, as we've heard tonight, the Palestinian people need our solidarity more than ever. We march to remind them that they are not alone, that the trade unions who are supporting our march, representing millions of British workers, that the students who will be marching with us, that all people of conscience understand the basic principle of solidarity, the recognition that an injury or an injustice to one is an injury or injustice to all. That is why, as we march again on Saturday, we will be chanting once again that fundamental truth. In our thousands and in our millions, we are all Palestinians. But we march because we here in Britain recognize the special responsibility we owe to the Palestinian people because of the ongoing complicity of our government, which continues to provide Israel with military, diplomatic, and political support, because of the ongoing complicity of our public bodies, which continue to invest in the companies that provide the infrastructure for Israel's system of oppression, and because of the ongoing complicity of those companies themselves. And we know that this British complicity extends way back before 1948 to Balfour and beyond. Now, in May 2021, as we marched in London, 200,000 strong, in response to Israel's assault on Gaza in that month, when I spoke from the stage in Hyde Park, I told the story of another relative of mine, my great uncle Shibli, who was also forced to flee from Palestine in 1948. 27 years earlier, in 1921, Shibli had come to London as part of a Palestinian delegation to negotiate with Winston Churchill, then the Secretary of State for the Colonies, to overthrow the Balfour Declaration. During the year, the fruitless year that delegation spent in London, they held the very first Palestine rally in Hyde Park, and my great uncle Shibli spoke at it. Over 100 years of Palestinians rallying in London, calling out for justice. So please join us again on Saturday. Our march this year will be led by a cohort of young Palestinians, the latest, most recent generation who have not forgotten and who will be marching, carrying aloft keys, the symbol of Palestinian return. They will be echoing the words of the poem that you will hear at the conclusion of tonight's rally. We have not forgotten. We will not forget. Veins like roots of olive trees, we will return. That is not a threat, not a wish, nor a hope or a dream, but a promise. Join us in London on May the 13th.
Thank you, Ben. So as we come to the end here, I will tell you that I live in Birmingham in the UK, and my mother lives with me, who was born in Jerusalem before Israel was created. And I always think, how is it that a Jewish lady from Birmingham can get on a plane tomorrow and go and live in Jerusalem or in one of the settlements when my mother can't go back to live there? And when people say, when will you know that peace has come to the Holy Land? I always say, when my mother can return to Jerusalem, peace would have come to the Holy Land. Thank you all for joining us tonight. We will keep commemorating, but also we commit here in the UK to our Palestinian brothers and sisters who have joined us to continue the fight. I want to thank the speakers individually, but I want to particularly thank Rana for coming tonight and talking to us, considering the really horrendous situation everyone faced this morning and her personal experience. Thank you so much, Rana. And she told us offline, by the way, that she did fly out of the Yasser Arafat airport in the past. So here is someone who can remember it well, but it looks like a very sad place now. So thank you all very much indeed. And we will now conclude with this poem.
She was scared. 7 months pregnant. Guns pointed at temples. Tears dropping, stomach cusped, back bent. Dirt pathways leading to dispossession. Rocking boats, waves crashing, people rushing, falling over each other, packing into small spaces. Like memories. Her home. Mandated, occupied, cleansed, conquered, terrorizers sat on hills sniping children, neighbors fled on April 10th. Word came of massacre. They stayed, didn't fight, didn't flee, shells and bombs bursting in air like anthems, prayed for the dead, with priests and imams, prayed for the living, looking over shoulders for the Irgun and Haganah. She's a warrior, raised life. Planted trees, painted fruit, as if the road was her garden, orphaned twice. Had birth from Palestine, whispered Jaffa till final breath, never knew essence until she found emptiness, 48 ways to flee, and she found Beirut. Bullet holes in buildings, reminder of home, but not home. Years later, daughters sat on hills in the south, dreaming of breaking water never touched, thinks of their mother, that warrior, how battles still rage here and abroad, orchards flourished, propagandists called them barons, land expropriated for Europeans who called religion ethnicity, not native, not from here, plant flags, call it home, rename cities and villages, wiping, cleaning, cleansing memory that this is not theirs. Passed away August 22nd, 2009. Frail hands shook, lip trembled, didn't want to die, but suffered decades. She will speak Arabic, broken English, wounded words and murmurs, her eyes close, but every so often they blink brilliance. Memories that cannot be erased, uprooted, or stolen, she has not forgotten. We have not forgotten. We will not forget. Veins like roots of olive trees, we will return. That is not a threat, not a wish, a hope, or a dream, but a promise.